In March 2009, Japanese authorities added an extraordinary fact to the official record of a 93-year-old man named Tsutomu Yamaguchi. His record would now acknowledge what he had carried for more than 6 decades. He had been exposed to the atomic bomb in Hiroshima, and then, 3 days later, to the atomic bomb in Nagasaki. But the meaning of that record is often misunderstood. Yamaguchi was not the only person to live through both attacks. His distinction was official dual recognition, and behind that distinction was not a curiosity about impossible survival. It was a life divided by 2 dates. This is the documented story of one Mitsubishi engineer whose journey connected the only 2 cities ever attacked with atomic bombs in war. It is also a story about the limits of the record. Some details come from official city histories, others come from testimony. Yamaguchi gave many decades later. Those forms of evidence are not identical, but together they establish the central fact. He was present in both cities, survived both bombings, and eventually chose to speak publicly against nuclear weapons. His experience matters only if we resist the temptation to treat survival as spectacle. The real subject is what happened to 2 cities, and what one witness believed the future needed to remember. Tsutomu Yamaguchi was born in Nagasaki on the 16th March 1916. By 1945, he was an engineer working for Mitsubishi in shipbuilding. That summer, his work had taken him temporarily away from his home city to Hiroshima. The war in the Pacific had reached its final, destructive phase. Cities across Japan had already endured conventional bombing. But the weapon used on Hiroshima was different in kind and concentration. At 8:15 on the morning of 6 August 1945, the first atomic bomb used in war exploded over Hiroshima. Yamaguchi later said that he was about 3 kilometers from the hypocenter. In his later testimony, he described burns and injuries affecting his sight and his left ear. That wording matters. These details survive primarily because Yamaguchi recounted them long afterward. They are his testimony, not a moment-by-moment medical chart written on the morning of the attack. The larger destruction cannot be reduced to what happened to one man. Hiroshima was a city filled with people whose lives were ended, injured, or permanently altered. Yamaguchi's experience is one path through that collective catastrophe, not a measure of it. This distinction changes how the documentary must be told. A biography can give history a human scale, but it can also narrow our field of vision. Yamaguchi's name endured because he later testified and because his 2 exposures received distinctive recognition. Countless other experiences were recorded differently, remained private, or disappeared with the people who carried them. His life should therefore open a view onto the bombings, never close the story around a single exceptional survivor. What makes his path historically exceptional is where it led next. After the Hiroshima bombing, Yamaguchi found shelter and received treatment. He then made his way to the railway and traveled back toward Nagasaki. The surviving accounts support the journey by train, but not every precise schedule or colorful detail that later retellings have attached to it. The journey joined 2 places that no one yet understood would soon share the same fate. For Yamaguchi, Nagasaki was home. It was also a major industrial city, with Mitsubishi facilities woven into its wartime economy. He returned injured from a city that had been devastated by a single weapon. 3 days after Hiroshima, on 9 August, another American bombing mission approached Japan. The mission's primary target was Kokura. Conditions there prevented the attack, and the bomber, Boxcar, proceeded to its secondary target, Nagasaki. At 11:02 in the morning, the second atomic bomb exploded over the city. At that moment, Yamaguchi was at a Mitsubishi workplace. According to the accounts he later gave, He had been telling colleagues about the destruction of Hiroshima. Then, Nagasaki was struck. There is no need to manufacture dialogue for that moment. The established sequence is powerful enough. A man reporting that one bomb had destroyed a city was present when another bomb exploded over the city to which he had returned. Yet even this extraordinary sequence can distort the history if it is told only as an individual escape. Nagasaki City's official museum record describes harm produced through the combined effects of blast, heat, fire, and radiation. Its historical estimate through the end of 1945 records 73,184 deaths and 74,909 injuries. These are estimates, not a perfect count, and each number represents a human life rather than a dramatic statistic. Yamaguchi survived. Other people also lived through both attacks. Their existence is essential to understanding his story accurately. He was not alone in crossing the terrible boundary between Hiroshima and Nagasaki. What later made his case distinctive was not survival itself. It was the way his experience entered the official record. The word hibakusha is commonly used for people affected by the atomic bombings. In post-war Japan, recognition also became connected to an official system of identification, medical support, and assistance. For Yamaguchi, the administrative history before 2009 is not completely clear in the English-language sources. Accounts disagree about which exposure appeared in earlier documents and about how the record changed over time. That uncertainty should not be disguised. What can be stated securely is this. In March 2009, Japanese authorities formally recorded his exposure in both Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The delay did not mean that Yamaguchi had hidden the basic sequence from everyone around him, nor that officials suddenly discovered the existence of double exposure. It means only that this particular official record was amended in 2009. The surviving English accounts do not support a more precise explanation of the paperwork, and the distinction matters. Administrative uncertainty should not be converted into a dramatic mystery. Contemporary reports described his dual official recognition as distinctive, but officially recognized twice does not mean the only survivor twice. Yamaguchi's own later writing referred to other double victims, and other survivors of both attacks have also been documented. That distinction reveals something important about historical memory. An event can be lived before it is fully recorded. A person can carry an experience for decades before an institution finds language for it, and when the record finally changes, it can create a misleading impression that the experience itself was unique. Yamaguchi's story was becoming more public in his later life. He spoke about the bombings, contributed his testimony, and advocated for nuclear abolition. Sources differ on the exact moment this public role began, so it is safest to understand it as a gradual turn in his later years. His testimony carried unusual authority, but authority is not the same as perfect recall. The accounts available to us were shaped by the long distance between 1945 and the years in which he spoke publicly. They were also shaped by the questions later audiences asked. The very feature that drew international attention, the experience of two bombings, could overshadow everything else. Careful narration must therefore keep returning to what the evidence actually permits, especially when familiar retellings offer sharper dialogue, exact schedules, or neat medical conclusions that the checked record cannot sustain. That does not make them disposable. Survivor testimony often preserves experiences that official documents cannot. But responsible history identifies whose memory is speaking, avoids adding imagined detail, and separates direct recollection from later inference. In Yamaguchi's case, that means we can say he described being about 3 kilometers from the Hiroshima hypocenter. We can say he reported burns and injuries affecting his sight and left ear. We can say he returned by train to Nagasaki and was at a Mitsubishi workplace when the second bomb exploded. We cannot calculate his radiation dose from that distance alone. We cannot claim he suffered no harm in Nagasaki. We cannot use later disease as proof of an individual causal chain. And we cannot fill the silence of those days with imagined thoughts. The restraint is not a limitation on the story. It is what allows the story to remain his. The most familiar version of Yamaguchi's life presents the second bombing as the twist. Hiroshima, then Nagasaki. But that is only the chronological turning point. The deeper turning point came much later, when private experience became public witness. In later life, Yamaguchi spoke in favor of remembrance and the abolition of nuclear weapons. In a 2009 interview, he argued that Japan could not eliminate nuclear weapons by itself. Preventing another nuclear war required action beyond one country. This changed the meaning of his survival. It was no longer simply a biographical fact repeated because it sounded impossible. It became the basis of an argument directed toward the future. That argument did not require Yamaguchi to be the only double survivor. In fact, the presence of others strengthens the historical point. The two bombings were not sealed events experienced by isolated populations. People traveled, families crossed records and jurisdictions, and some lives connected both cities. Nor did official recognition make Yamaguchi more authentic than survivors whose experiences were recorded differently. It made his paperwork historically notable. The suffering and testimony existed before the amendment. This is where the popular label of luck fails. It asks us to count survival without accounting for what was survived. It turns a life marked by injury and the destruction of two cities into a game of probability. Yamaguchi's later role points in the opposite direction. The value of his testimony lies not in beating extraordinary odds, but in refusing to let the event become abstract. He could connect dates, places, and policy to a human life that continued long after August 1945. His case also shows why fact and meaning must remain distinct. The facts establish presence, injury, travel, survival, recognition, and advocacy. The meaning comes from how we understand that record, not as proof that one person was chosen by fate, but as evidence of the reach of nuclear war. Tsutomu Yamaguchi died in Nagasaki on 4th of January 2010. He was 93. His reported cause of death was stomach cancer, but the available evidence does not establish that either atomic bombing caused that illness. That boundary is important because respect for survivors does not permit us to turn every later illness into a claim that medicine and documentation cannot prove. What is clear is that Yamaguchi left a public record of opposition to nuclear weapons. His later testimony linked personal memory to a collective demand. The attacks on Hiroshima and Nagasaki should remain warnings, not precedents. The official record, added in 2009, ensured that both city names would stand together in the documentation of his life. But his legacy cannot be contained in an identification record. It also survives in the care required to tell the story accurately. On 6 August 1945, Tsutomu Yamaguchi was in Hiroshima. On 9 August, he was in Nagasaki. He survived both atomic bombings. That sentence is astonishing. It is also incomplete. Other people lived through both attacks. Entire communities bore the destruction. And the details we know come from a mixture of official history and memories recorded many years later. The honest version of Yamaguchi's story does not need exaggeration. It asks something more difficult of us: to look past the novelty of survival and recognize the responsibility of witness. His life connected Hiroshima and Nagasaki by rail, by memory, and finally by an official record. His later message connected them to the future. The unbelievable truth is not that one man somehow defeated two bombs. It is that humanity built weapons capable of destroying cities, and that those who lived through their use spent the rest of their lives asking the world not to repeat it.